The San Jose Civic wasn't just a stage, it was an arena where America's past and future collided. Obama walked in with receipts, Trump stormed in with fire. Calm precision faced raw fury. The question wasn't who shouted louder. It was who the nation would believe when truth and power finally went head-to-head. Right before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow. The San Jose Civic Auditorium pulsed with anticipation, every corner alive with tension. Bright television lights washed over more than 3,000 people packed shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by a mix of excitement and defiance. On the massive screens that framed the stage, bold chyrons declared, "Obama versus Trump, Town Hall on Recovery." The words carried the weight of a prize fight, not a policy discussion. From the first moment, it was clear this would be no ordinary evening. People had abandoned dinners mid-bite, leaving plates half-eaten at kitchen tables. Bartenders in crowded bars turned televisions up to full volume, forcing laughter and small talk into silence. Across the country, phones buzzed with live stream alerts, households tuned in, and watch parties formed as though the nation were bracing for the championship round of its longest-running rivalry. The energy was electric, a hum of democracy charged with confrontation. Backstage, the contrast between the two men defined the night before it even began. Barack Obama sat calmly, papers arranged in clean stacks, his glass of water untouched at his side. He leaned back in his chair with the same measured patience that had once defined his presidency, his stillness radiating quiet authority. Just a few doors away, Donald Trump paced restlessly, Sharpie uncapped, scrawled notes scattered across the table. His foot tapped with impatience, his movements sharp, his voice occasionally bursting through the curtain as he rehearsed lines under his breath. Two leaders, two worlds, one collision course. The moderator's voice, barely above a whisper, cut through the buzzing earpiece. This isn't going to stay polite. It was a confession, not a warning. Every technician, every producer, every assistant in the wings knew it. Tonight would end with more than sound bites. Tonight, history would mark a turning point. The crowd grew louder, chants clashing in a storm of voices. Obama, Obama, met with Trump, Trump, until the noise felt less like democracy and more like the roar of a divided nation daring each man to prove himself. The moderator stepped onto the stage, took a breath, and let the words hang heavy in the hall. Tonight, America hears the truth. The lights dimmed, the chants swelled, and the silence broke. The stage was set. Barlu Badol's presence on the San Jose stage carried echoes of a man who once commanded the world's attention with quiet certainty. For years, his political style had been defined by what many called his no-drama approach. His speeches during the 2008 campaign were remembered not for fury but for clarity. When he spoke of hope, people leaned forward not because he shouted, but because his cadence made every word feel deliberate, chosen with care. He had a lawyer's training, a scholar's patience, and a leader's restraint. Flashbacks rolled across the national memory like scenes in a documentary. The victory night in Chicago, where Obama's voice, steady and low, carried across Grant Park to a sea of tears and cheers. The solemn cadence after tragedies, when he paused longer than most politicians dared, letting silence honor the weight of loss before continuing. His presidency had been marked by an almost surgical command of language. He rarely wasted words, rarely let emotion derail his logic. Those who worked with him called it discipline. His critics, even when frustrated, admitted they could not knock him off rhythm. That discipline became his philosophy. Speak less, say more. It was not simply a slogan, but a guiding principle. He believed words were currency, and that overspending them left a leader bankrupt of meaning. Tonight, as he prepared to return to the spotlight in a high-stakes town hall, it was not for vanity. It was a deliberate strike, as measured as his pause before an answer, as intentional as the neat stack of papers at his side. O'Brien's return mattered because it was rare. Since leaving the White House, he had mostly avoided direct confrontations. He preferred books, foundations, mentorship of rising leaders. To see him step back into the heat of a televised clash with Donald Trump was startling. It signaled that the moment demanded something more than polite commentary. He was not here to trade insults or wallow in spectacle. He was here because he believed facts, stated calmly, could cut through the storm of noise that had overtaken political discourse. His power had never come from being the loudest man in the room. It came from the way he controlled silence. The pause before his words, the calm in his gaze, the measured delivery that made his opponent's outbursts look juvenile. In a world addicted to volume, Obama's quietness was his sharpest weapon. When he finally stepped into the lights of the San Jose Civic, Americans weren't waiting for fireworks. They were waiting for the kind of words that change how people think when the shouting fades. Donald Trump entered the same arena carrying a completely different energy. Where Obama's strength was discipline, Trump's was combustion. His political career had always been built on noise, on rallies that felt more like rock concerts than campaign stops. Stadiums packed with supporters chanted his slogans in unison, their voices rising in a roar that seemed to fuel him like oxygen. He thrived on the spectacle, on the raw illiquidity of a crowd that demanded confrontation, not conflict. The montage of his rise played across America's memory with equal vividness. The fiery chants of "Build the Wall" echoing in stadiums, the sharp bursts of capital letters in late-night social media posts, his voice unfiltered and his words often as much performance as policy. For Trump, politics was not a courtroom or a classroom. It was a battlefield, and the rule was simple. Never back down, never concede an inch. His philosophy could be summed up in 5 words: fight everything, admit nothing. That philosophy had carried him far, but it also revealed its cracks under pressure. Trump's dominance relied on momentum, on never letting silence linger. He controlled by flooding the space with words, with interruptions, with accusations hurled faster than anyone could fact-check them. He won by making chaos the environment and then ruling that chaos like its natural master. But when challenged by someone who refused to play that game, someone who stayed calm while he raged, the dominance could falter. The cracks could show. That was why tonight mattered. Trump was stepping into a stage not of his own making, not framed entirely by his energy. He was walking into an arena where his opponent, Barack Obama, thrived on restraint. The cameras would split-screen their styles, America watching in real time as calm precision met furious fire. Trump's instincts told him to overwhelm, to bluster, to pivot every question into an attack. Yet for every outburst, the risk was that Obama's silence would speak louder. The emotional rhythm of this setup was inescapable. Tonight's event was not simply about policies or statistics. It was about style clashing with style, philosophy against philosophy, Obama's discipline versus Trump's combustion. The story itself became the contrast. Could control defeat chaos? Could receipts overcome rhetoric? As Trump adjusted his tie and gripped the podium with the confidence of a man who had won through volume before, the challenge hung heavy over the hall. One man leaned on stillness, the other relied on fire. And in that collision, America would see which carried more power. The first question from the moderator sounded routine on paper: small businesses and inflation. Yet everyone in the San Jose Civic knew it was the spark that would light the fuse. Barack Obama leaned forward slightly, his expression calm, his voice measured. He did not reach for flourish or fire. Instead, he reached for facts. He began by citing a Treasury Department audit, the kind of dry, bureaucratic document most politicians would avoid. Obama's tone made it riveting. 1 in 5 small businesses never saw relief funds, he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. That's not an exception. That's a failure. The phrasing landed with the precision of a verdict. He paused, letting the silence hang, forcing the audience to sit with the weight of the number. Murmurs rippled across the hall. Some clapped hesitantly. Others nodded in grim recognition. Obama continued, drawing on Bureau of Labor Statistics data, connecting the dots between inflation, supply chain breakdowns, and the gaps in relief. His delivery was less about blame and more about evidence. The numbers came one by one, each footnoted in his cadence as if he were arguing before the Supreme Court. His style gave the impression that he was not just debating, he was prosecuting a case. Trump stood only a few feet away, shifting from one foot to the other, his jaw tightening. The camera split screen showed the contrast. Obama calm, leaning into the mic with his steady cadence, while Trump's eyes darted restlessly toward the moderators. The visual itself became a message. One man anchored, the other simmering. Social media lit up instantly. Hashtags appeared like sparks flying from a struck match. Obama receives, Trump on defense. Users clipped the line, "That's not an exception," and replayed it on loop, overlaying graphics of the Treasury report. Podcasters and pundits live tweeted in real time, calling it "the first blow landed." The moderator tried to keep the event moving, but the shift in the room was palpable. People who had arrived chanting slogans were now whispering among themselves. The audience began to fracture, not along party lines, but along the divide between noise and clarity. Obama had shown that he was not here for platitudes. He had come armed with receipts, and in doing so he had redefined the terms of engagement. Donald Trump could not let the silence hold. As Obama's calm statistics hung in the air, Trump cut in, his voice rising before the moderator even finished the follow-up. "Wrong, totally wrong. Those are fake numbers," he barked, slamming a hand onto the podium. His words echoed across the auditorium, jolting the audience like a thunderclap. From there, his tone escalated. He pivoted away from the question entirely, launching into a familiar barrage of attacks. He accused Obama of weakening America's energy independence, of leaving the country vulnerable during his presidency, of never understanding business the way real Americans do. The crowd split in response. Cheers erupted from one section while boos thundered from another. The auditorium became an echo chamber of division. At one point, Trump pounded the podium so hard that his microphone wobbled. "Fake numbers," he repeated, jabbing a finger not at Obama but at the moderators themselves. "You're letting him read off papers like it's real. It's not real. It's propaganda." His face reddened, sweat gathering along his brow as he leaned forward with the raw force of a rally speaker more than a town hall guest. The cameras caught the split-screen image in stark relief. On one side, Trump loomed over the podium, his body language explosive, his gestures wild. On the other, Obama sipped water, unhurried, his gaze steady on the audience as if Trump's eruption were little more than background noise. The juxtaposition played across millions of screens in living rooms, bars, and phone feeds. Calm against chaos, stillness against fire. Audience reactions swung wildly. Some booed Trump's interruptions, shouting, "Let him finish!" Others cheered, clapping in rhythm with his fist pounds. It was no longer just a debate, it was a tug-of-war for the soul of the room. The moderators struggled to maintain order, raising their hands, calling for quiet, their voices nearly drowned out by the clamor. Networks seized the footage instantly, clips replayed in real time, anchors narrating over the live broadcast as though it were a breaking news event. Analysts whispered about how Trump's fury contrasted with Obama's patience, how the optics alone were telling a story even without the words. For viewers, the takeaway was visceral. Two styles not simply colliding, but colliding so violently that the sound itself became a spectacle. By the time the moderators wrestled control back, the stage was no longer just a platform for answers. It was an arena where tone and temperament had become as important as policy. And in that arena, Trump had chosen fire, even if it risked burning him in the process. As the clash unfolded in San Jose, the ripple spread across the country in real time. In veterans' halls, groups leaned toward television screens, muttering among themselves. Some shook their heads at Trump's interruptions, whispering, "He looks guilty." Others smiled at his aggression, saying, "That's strength. That's presidential." The divide played out not just in the auditorium, but in every living room where the broadcast streamed. In college dorm rooms, students huddled around laptops, some scribbling notes as if the debate were a lecture, others sharing memes within minutes of the split-screen shots. In kitchens, families paused dinner conversations, parents and children alike weighing in as though their voices were part of the national chorus. America was not just watching. America was judging. Analysts live-blogged with frantic keystrokes. "Obama's using Trump's own reports to fact-check him," one wrote, pointing out how the Treasury audits Obama cited had been published under Trump's administration. The irony was not lost on the audience online, where threads dissected the clash line by line. To many, it felt like a televised courtroom drama, with Obama methodically introducing evidence and Trump objecting loudly without rebuttal. The split became the story itself. Commentators observed how unusual it was for Obama to step back into the ring, noting how his calm, deliberate tone made Trump's fury look exaggerated by comparison. Others countered that Trump's energy was what his supporters loved him for, that without it he would not be Trump. Both arguments found their defenders, but the larger truth was unavoidable. America was watching two different definitions of leadership collide in real time. The foreshadow of what was to come lingered in the air. The moderators, shuffling their papers nervously, prepared the next question, one that would dig deeper into pensions and corporate bailouts. Everyone knew it was the kind of subject that touched households directly, the kind of issue that could inflame both reason and rage. The stage lights glared hotter, the chants in the auditorium grew louder, and the cameras zoomed in on the two men now locked in an ideological standoff. Receipts versus rhetoric, calm precision versus volcanic fury. And as America leaned in, waiting for the next exchange, the unspoken question hung heavier than ever. When pensions and bailouts entered the conversation, would the night ignite beyond control? Morning after the town hall, the clip was everywhere. A moderator's incredulous voice, "Your Treasury report is wrong?" And Trump's fumbling denial looped endlessly across every platform. It was less than 10 seconds long, but its impact was nuclear. Anchors replayed it with raised eyebrows, analysts dissected it with amusement, and late-night comedians pounced with reenactments that mocked Trump's bluster against Obama's quiet composure. The confrontation had spilled from the Civic auditorium onto the global stage, and the world couldn't look away. Cable news devoted hours to the split-screen image that had gone viral, Trump pounding the podium while Obama calmly sipped water. One network slowed it down, frame by frame, narrating the body language as if analyzing a boxing match. Podcasts dropped emergency episodes, debating whether Trump had ever been so effectively cornered in public. The phrase, "calm versus chaos," became shorthand for the night, a slogan repeated across headlines and think pieces. International outlets amplified the drama. The BBC called it a televised trial without a courtroom. French commentators noted how rare it was for Obama to step into the fray, framing the encounter as proof that American politics had reached a boiling point. In Tokyo, a news anchor described the exchange as a duel of styles that revealed more about the country than any poll could. It was not just about America anymore. It was about democracy under pressure, about how leadership itself would be defined in the years to come. The frenzy took on a life of its own. Twitter threads broke down the accuracy of the data Obama cited, linking directly to Treasury audits that most people had never bothered to read before. Instagram filled with side-by-side photos. Obama with his papers neat, Trump with his Sharpie scribbled notes. TikTok creators remixed the moment into skits, dance routines, and sarcastic voiceovers. Even those who normally avoided politics were drawn in, not because they cared about Treasury reports, but because the imagery was so stark, so undeniably cinematic. 8 shows leaned in with full segments. One comedian pretended to be a moderator, asking Trump basic math questions. Each answered with fake numbers, while the audience roared with laughter. Another reenacted the split screen by sipping tea in silence while a colleague screamed nonsense in the background. The crowd howled, but the underlying message was clear. The debate had crossed into cultural consciousness. By the end of the week, the confrontation was no longer confined to political junkies. It was a meme, a metaphor, a prism through which people measured credibility itself. Obama had not just won the exchange, he had created an image that refused to die. The impact rippled far beyond media cycles. In civics classrooms, teachers replayed Obama's words as though they were lines of scripture. Students scribbled notes on the phrase that was quickly becoming iconic. Truth doesn't change because it's inconvenient. Professors paused lectures to ask their students what it meant for politics, for journalism, for the very idea of accountability. The discussion spilled into hallways and dorms, where debates stretched late into the night. In black churches across the South, pastors echoed the same line in Sunday sermons, weaving it into themes of justice and perseverance. Congregants nodded, clapped, and repeated the phrase aloud. It wasn't just political anymore. It had become moral, a declaration of values in a time of noise. In veterans' halls, the line was repeated with pride, men and women who had served in uniform murmuring that truth had always been their compass, regardless of party. The reach was cross-generational, cross-political, cutting into spaces that rarely agreed on anything. Social media amplified the engagement into something bigger. The hashtags calm truth and peace, overraged, trended for days. Memes flooded timelines. Obama sipping tea while Trump raged, side by side with captions like leadership versus loudership. The image became a shorthand for a larger cultural divide, one that resonated far outside the immediate clash. People wore the memes on t-shirts, printed them on mugs, even painted murals in college towns. It wasn't just about who had won the night. It was about a hunger for leadership that felt anchored in reality rather than performance. Podcasts and live streams invited young voters to talk about what the moment meant to them. Many said they were tired of feeling gaslit by politics, tired of leaders who shouted down facts with noise. Obama's calm delivery gave them something they hadn't felt in years, the sense that truth could still win without theatrics. For older Americans, it felt like a reminder of a steadier political era, one where leaders treated data and reality as tools rather than obstacles. The event bridged age groups in a way few moments ever had. Universities reported that political science lectures were suddenly full, students eager to analyze the confrontation as if it were a case study in rhetoric. Some law professors drew parallels to courtroom strategy, where one side introduced evidence and the other objected without substance. Others pointed out that the clash highlighted a deeper question about democracy. Could facts survive in a world where volume drowned everything out? Everywhere, Obama's phrasing became a mantra. It appeared on posters at rallies, in op-eds, in speeches by rising politicians. Trump's fury had not been forgotten, but it was Obama's restraint that people carried forward. The power of the moment wasn't just in what was said, it was in how it resonated. How ordinary people repeated it in their own voices, giving it life long after the cameras turned off. If the public embraced Obama's words, the political class wrestled with their implications. On Capitol Hill, reporters ambushed Republican lawmakers with the same question over and over. Do you believe Obama's numbers? Some dodged, insisting they hadn't watched the town hall. Others laughed nervously, muttering that they would have to check. A few, caught off guard, admitted openly, if he says it, we should check. Even that sliver of concession sent shockwaves through the political ecosystem. Behind closed doors, donors began to whisper. At fundraising dinners, the phrase electability problem floated between courses of steak and wine. They wondered aloud whether Trump's fury could still win general elections, whether the split-screen image of chaos against calm would haunt him with suburban voters. Consultants produced hurried memos warning that the confrontation was resonating in polling data, that independents preferred Obama's style overwhelmingly. Democrats, meanwhile, sensed opportunity. For months they had been divided on strategy, unsure whether to lean into policy or culture wars. Obama's performance gave them a new rallying cry. This is about credibility, not partisanship. The party's leaders repeated the line in interviews, uniting around the idea that the clash wasn't just about two men, but about what politics itself should look like. It reframed the conversation from ideology to integrity, a framing that Democrats knew played well beyond their base. The fallout extended into campaign strategy. Candidate training manuals, once focused on rapid response and sound bites, began to include a new section, Don't Attack What You Don't Audit. Operatives told candidates to be prepared with receipts, to expect audiences to demand proof rather than slogans. Trump's outburst had shifted expectations not just for him, but for everyone. Whispers of deeper consequences began to circulate. Staffers hinted that more documents were being prepared, that further investigations into relief funds and corporate bailouts would follow. Reporters caught wind of subpoenas being drafted, of oversight committees suddenly emboldened. The town hall had not just been a clash, it had opened the door to accountability measures that had been stalled for months. Obama's calm delivery had given cover for others to step forward. The sense of momentum was undeniable. What began as a televised confrontation had spiraled into a movement, reshaping political strategy, donor confidence, and party unity. For Trump, the night had been about defending his record with fury. For Obama, it had been introducing evidence with patience. But in the aftermath, it was Obama's approach that set the tone for the future. The whispers of documents and investigations promised that this story would not fade quietly. It would build, layer by layer, into something larger than a single night. And so, the comeback was not just about Obama. It was about the persistence of truth in a political landscape addicted to noise. It was about a story that refused to die, one that threatened to reshape the battlefield long after the lights of the Civic auditorium dimmed. The cultural reverberations of the San Jose showdown spread quickly, seeping into corners of American life far removed from the polished stage lights of the Civic auditorium. In student forums across the country, the debate became more than a clash of personalities. It became a philosophical argument. In late-night discussions inside college libraries, one question echoed again and again. Who decides what's qualified? Who defines young people, often dismissed as disinterested in politics, were suddenly interrogating the foundations of authority itself? The confrontation had become a spark for civic curiosity. Online, the response took a material form. Merch appeared almost overnight: shirts, hoodies, stickers, and mugs emblazoned with the phrase, "Receipts greater than right." Vendors on street corners outside campuses sold buttons with Obama's calm face beside the slogan. Etsy shops listed designs that captured the split-screen moment: Obama sipping water, Trump pounding the podium. The imagery became cultural shorthand for fact versus fury. What had once been a political clash now carried the symbolism of a generational movement. Editorial boards added intellectual weight to the frenzy. A widely shared New York Times column titled "Deference versus Due Diligence" argued that Perelman would no longer afford to take leaders at their word without demanding evidence. The Washington Post ran an op-ed agreeing that charisma without receipts was a form of manipulation, not leadership. Meanwhile, younger generations created their own editorial responses in digital zines and on Substack platforms, insisting that even icons like Obama should not be immune from verification. The debate was no longer about one man's performance, but about the birth of a new expectation. That proof, not personality, must be the currency of leadership. The civic takeaway was undeniable. For years, American political discourse had been dominated by volume, spectacle, and outrage. But after San Jose, the vernacular shifted. Phrases like "show me the receipts" or "proof over promises" became standard in online discourse. On TikTok, teenagers mocked politicians with filters and captions demanding sources. In classrooms, students asked teachers not just for historical facts, but for documentation. In family kitchens, teenagers challenged their parents with phrases like, "Where's the evidence?" It was cultural osmosis. The idea that truth must be backed by proof had leapt from a single town hall into the bloodstream of everyday life. By the time weeks had passed, the confrontation was no longer a news story, it was a cultural marker. Americans had added a new rule to their political playbook: don't just speak, show. And in that demand for verification, the language of receipts became the new vernacular of democracy. If the cultural impact was profound, the political fallout was seismic. Barack Obama's steady presence dominated Sunday political shows, his calm delivery replayed and reframed as a model of leadership. Moderators pressed Trump's surrogates with the same pointed question again and again: do you dispute the Treasury's numbers? Some tried to pivot, others attempted counterattacks, but each effort fell flat under the glare of Obama's documented citations. For the first time in years, Trump's allies found themselves cornered not by insults but by proof. Republicans, sensing the shift, began to recalibrate. Party strategists held closed-door sessions where they admitted that shouting matches and personal attacks had diminishing returns against a public newly sensitized to facts. Behind the scenes, consultants urged candidates to lean more heavily on mentorship and credibility rather than chest-thumping. The tone of internal memos shifted away from pure aggression toward preparedness. Even within Trump's own circles, whispers began about whether the strategy of constant combat was sustainable in a landscape suddenly obsessed with verification. Candidate training manuals reflected the new reality. A rule quickly appeared at the top of the communications section: don't attack what you don't audit. It was not merely a slogan, but a warning. Candidates were told to vet every accusation, to arrive with citations in hand, and to avoid improvising claims that could be shredded by receipts on live television. For a jarring new discipline, yet survival demanded adaptation. Democrats, meanwhile, seized the moment with unity rarely seen in recent years. Leaders echoed Obama's phrasing across stump speeches and press releases. This is about credibility, not partisanship. The line became a rallying cry, uniting progressives and moderates under a shared banner of accountability. Party operatives used the confrontation as a fundraising tool, appealing to voters who wanted a politics of evidence rather than chaos. Donors, impressed by the resonance, funneled money into candidates who modeled the calm, fact-driven approach that Obama had embodied. The net effect was larger than either party anticipated. Proof-based discourse, once considered a niche demand of academics and policy wonks, had moved to center stage. Debates, campaign ads, and even local town halls were suddenly scrutinized with a sharper lens. Voters who once tolerated vague promises began asking for specifics. Politicians who thrived on slogans alone discovered their rallies were no longer enough. The San Jose confrontation had begun as a clash between two men, but its fallout reshaped the rules of the game. In the new order, receipts mattered more than rhetoric, and the political battlefield had been forever altered. The final images of the night lingered long after the lights dimmed in the San Jose Civic. Barack Obama moved slowly along the edge of the stage, shaking hands, taking time with each person who reached for him. His papers were tucked neatly under one arm, his glass of water empty, his posture relaxed but steady. There was no rush in his movements, only the calm rhythm of a man who had said what needed to be said and trusted the words to carry themselves. Just a few feet away, Donald Trump moved in the opposite direction, rushing off with his staff clustered tightly around him. His tie hung slightly askew, his face still flushed from the heat of the confrontation. The scattered note cards he had scribbled on were gathered hastily, some slipping to the floor as aides scrambled to follow. The contrast was unmistakable. One man left as though the evening belonged to him. The other departed as though the evening had slipped out of his control. The montage of those closing moments burned into the memory of millions. Across televisions, tablets, and phones, the image repeated. Obama offering steady handshakes, Trump disappearing into the shadows of the backstage corridor. Narrators and anchors echoed the same theme with variations, but all returned to the same truth. Two men, two methods. One fought with volume, the other with verification. One left behind noise, the other left behind proof. The lesson was not subtle. Loudness does not equal leadership. Shouting does not equal strength. The volume of one man's voice could not drown out the weight of another man's evidence. For a country wearied by years of political theater, the San Jose confrontation offered something rare. It reminded Americans that truth spoken plainly still cuts through the noise. Facts, when wielded with patience, still carry power. And leadership, at its core, is measured not by how much space a person fills, but by the clarity of what they leave behind. That is the challenge left for all who watched. To demand more than slogans, to require more than fury, to hold every leader, whether favored or opposed, to the standard of receipts, not rhetoric. The night in San Jose was not only about Obama and Trump, it was about the kind of politics the American people will choose to reward. And that choice belongs to you. If you believe leaders should be judged not by volume but by facts, not by spectacle but by integrity, then add your voice to this movement. Subscribe, because this channel will always bring you the truth others bury. Subscribe, because the fight for accountability is not a single night, but an ongoing story. And subscribe, because the story that began in San Jose will not end there. It will live on in every demand for proof, every insistence on credibility, every moment when the calm truth stands against the chaos of noise.